From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
They have rifles. They are shooting live ammunition at us. We've already, we've had a lot of wounded. I don't know how many. The ambulance keeps on coming and carrying wounded people and speeding away with them. We've had so far 4 confirmed deaths. One of them was with a shot right through the head.
Testimony from Tahrir. Pro-Mubarak forces attempt to take the square on camels, horses, with guns, knives, and fists. We'll get reports from inside and speak with Democracy Now! Senior producer Sharif Abdel-Quddus, who continues to report on the ground from the uprising in Egypt. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak's facing increasing calls to resign following violent attacks by pro-Mubarak forces against protesters near Tahrir Square in Cairo. At least 6 people have been killed, almost 1,000 have been injured. Machine gun fire has been heard throughout the day in the square. Wounded protesters are being treated in makeshift medical clinics. On Wednesday, Mubarak loyalists began the attack by charging Tahrir Square on horseback and camels, lashing out at civilians. Democracy Now! Spoke to Cairo resident Salma Al-Tarzi shortly after the attacks began.
It's a massacre. They're coming in government cars, buses, in thousands. They have knives. They are throwing Molotov bombs. They are burning the trees. They're throwing stones at us. We managed to catch many of them. All of them are undercover police.
Earlier today, Egypt's new prime minister apologized for what he described as a, quote, fatal error. But the violence by pro-Mubarak forces continues. Egyptian authorities are reportedly forcing the cell phone company Vodafone to send out pro-Mubarak text messages. Despite the violence, many anti-Mubarak protesters have refused to leave Tahrir Square. In Washington, State Department spokesperson P.J. Crowley claimed he wasn't certain who caused the violence in the square, where anti-government protesters had been peacefully assembling for the past week.
We don't know who unleashed these thugs on the streets of Cairo. They've been identified as supporters of the government, but whoever they are, there needs to be accountability here. This was clearly an attempt at intimidating the protesters who have been communicating to the government and insisting on change. As the President said last night, there needs to be a transition. It needs to start now.
Many protesters in Egypt urge the United States to take a firmer stand against its longtime ally.
If the President Obama said directly to Mubarak, you have to leave and leave the country to decide what they want, the peace gonna repack to Egypt in 1 second. If he said this, we all of us, we go back. I am here. I don't know how many days. I am here from Friday. I left Sinai. I have a restaurant in Sinai. I left the restaurant and I came here to be here, and I never come back to my home. Even Mubarak go away. He must go.
Opposition leaders, including the liberal figurehead Mohammed al-Baradei and the Muslim Brotherhood, have rejected a call to negotiate with Mubarak's new prime minister, Ahmed Shafiq. They told Reuters only the president's departure and an end to violence would bring them to negotiations. Meanwhile, the Committee to Protect Journalists is accusing the Mubarak regime of orchestrating attacks on reporters covering the protests. In the most high-profile case, Anderson Cooper was repeatedly punched in the head, and his production team was attacked in a scene that was caught on video.
Now, like 10 times. Yep. The Egyptian soldiers are doing nothing.
That was Anderson Cooper of CNN, journalist with CBS News, ABC News, BBC, The Washington Post, Australian Broadcasting, Danish TV2 News, and Swiss Television were also reportedly attacked. The Associated Press is reporting the Egyptian military has started rounding up journalists, claiming it is for their own safety. At least one group of foreign journalists have already been detained. It is reported another was knifed. While the world's attention has been on Egypt, mass protests continue across the Arab world. In Yemen, tens of thousands marched today in what's been described as a day of rage against President Ali Abdullah Saleh, who has ruled Yemen for 32 years. On Wednesday, Saleh announced he will not seek re-election, or he will not seek to extend his presidency past 2013, but protesters want him to step down sooner. In Jordan, activists gathered in Amman Wednesday to protest against Jordan's newly appointed Prime Minister, Maruf Bakit, and calling for genuine political and economic reform. The Jordanian King, Abdullah, met Bakit earlier this week in an attempt to stave off mass street protests. The Jordanian activist Fakhr Das took part in Wednesday's demonstration.
Today we say that cosmetic changes are not accepted. We do not want changes in faces. We want real grassroots change and in policies. We want an end to the economic policy which has been adopted by the government under the International Monetary Fund guidance since 1989. We want an end to repressive laws, including election laws.
In Sudan, 10 journalists were arrested earlier today ahead of anti-government protests. Security forces have surrounded universities, preventing students from spilling out onto the streets. Meanwhile, in the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority violently shut down a demonstration Wednesday by activists showing solidarity with the Egyptian protesters. And in Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the uprising in Egypt might force Israel to expand the size of its armed forces.
The basis of our stability, our future, and for maintaining peace or widening it, particularly in unstable times, this basis lies in bolstering Israel's might.
In other news, a maximum Category 5 cyclone has hit Australia, causing major structural damage to homes and boats in the Queensland. Despite being large enough to cover most of the United States and with winds stronger than Hurricane Katrina, Australian officials say Cyclone Yasi caused no serious injuries or deaths. Officials stressed assessments made thus far have been conducted by air. The extent of the damage will not be known until there are investigators on the ground. Sugarcane crops in some areas have been totally destroyed. The industry fears losses of up to $500 million. More than 180,000 homes are without power. The Wall Street Journal reports 2010 was a banner year for bankers as Wall Street compensation hit a record-breaking $135 billion. That's a 5.7% increase from 2009. Meanwhile, the number of Americans on food stamps continues to increase. 43.6 million people relied on food stamps in November. The number of people receiving food stamps has jumped by 14% over the past year. In Washington, D.C. and Mississippi, more than a fifth of residents receive food stamps. On Capitol Hill, Senate Republicans have failed to repeal President Obama's year-old health care law in a close vote. Republicans conceded their attempt was largely symbolic, but argued it forced Democrats to take a position on the issue. The U.S. Supreme Court is expected to rule on the constitutionality of the law after a series of conflicting decisions by federal judges. 3 House Democrats have accused Halliburton and 11 other energy companies with pumping over 32 million gallons of diesel fuel into the ground in 19 states in violation of the Safe Water Drinking Act. In a letter to the Environmental Protection Agency, California's Henry Waxman, Massachusetts' Ed Markey, and Colorado's Diana DeGette contend that Halliburton and others dumped the fluid during a phase of natural gas extraction known as fracking. In related news, a group representing the oil and gas industry have launched a campaign against Josh Fox's documentary Gasland, which has been nominated for an Academy Award. The group, Energy in Depth, claims Fox misstates and ignores verifiable facts. Fox maintains his documentary is 100% factual. Energy in Depth is an industry group formed to fight federal regulation of fracking. And the whistleblower website WikiLeaks has been nominated for the 2011 Nobel Peace Prize. A Norwegian parliamentarian nominated the site, arguing its contributions to freedom of speech and transparency were among the most important of the 21st century. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
And welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.